Hi everyone, my name is Cynthia and I'm a circulation clerk at the Pomeroy Library. Today we're going to be painting a daffodil inspired by William Wordsworth's poem, I Wandered Lonely as a Cloud. I'm going to be talking a little bit about the poem while we paint. Alright, so here are the things that I am using for today. We have an 8x5 piece of watercolor paper. You guys can use construction paper. Anything that's a little bit thicker than regular paper will do, because you don't want it to warp too bad, because we'll be using water. And so just a tiny little round brush. We only need one. If you want to use more, you can, but I'm only using this one. Super useful. And then your paint. So we're mainly going to be sticking with green, brown, orange, yellow, and maybe a little bit of red. So you guys obviously don't need all these colors. Acrylics can work with this too. You can use any kind of paint, acrylic, watercolor. This is gouache. It's a little bit in between acrylic and watercolor. You can water it down and make it look like watercolor, or you can use it straight out of the container and it'll look more like acrylic. And so you'll need something to mix your paint on in your water. You can use just like a plastic cup lid, a plate, anything will work. A paper towel or a towel. This one's an old one I use a lot for painting. And then a glass of water. And I'll put the reference photo in here so you guys can pause the video, screenshot it, and then that way you guys know what I am painting, or I'm looking at while I paint. So let's get started. I'm going to include the reference photo in the left side of the frame for the entire video, just so it's easier to look at and to follow along. I got this image from Pinterest, but the artist, her name is Kim Atwell, and she has her own website, handmadecardsbykim.com, where she sells her paintings as homemade cards, which I think is really cool. But I just wanted to shout her out and give her credit for the image, because we will be using it and I don't want anybody to think that it's my image. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to take this brighter yellow color and a more golden toned yellow. It's a little bit darker, and I'm just going to mix the two shades just until I can find the right shade or match it to the reference photo. And I'm including a piece of paper underneath our paper that we're going to be painting on, just so we can swatch the colors and make sure that they're the right tone that we want before we go on to our actual painting. So I chose this poem in particular because it's one of my favorite poems, and I'm sure most of you have heard of I Wandered Lonely as a Cloud, because it is a famous poem and it is by a famous poet. This poem was published in 1807. It was during the Romantic era, and William Wordsworth, he is probably the most well-known English poet, but he was very famous during the Romantic era and was kind of coined as one of the poets to bring it into literature during that time, or he was very influenced by the Romantic movement. Samuel Taylor Coleridge was also another person that is well known for bringing Romantic movement into English poetry. So what I am doing right now is I am just outlining the petals, and then I'm going to fill them in as I go. We just want to get that base of the flower down so we know where to start our stem and the middle section of the flower. So just follow the shapes of the reference photo, or follow what I'm doing, and then fill them in as we go, because it'll make it easier to go back and darken those areas when we need to add dimension and depth to the painting. And then once we get to the bottom flower, we want to bring it down, curve it down, and then add a little point at the end like we see in the reference photo. This just gives it the effect that it's pointing down, or it's turning down. And then we'll want to fill it in like the rest of the petals. So the Romantic era started at the end of the 18th century, and it started because of the result of the Enlightenment era and in response to the Industrial Revolution. And the Enlightenment era really focused on facts and scientific discoveries, and it was very logical and critical, where the Romantic era is the opposite. It's more imaginative, it focuses more on the human spirit and the individual mind, individualism, than the Enlightenment era did. And so lyrical poetry was a popular choice among writers because it focused on imagery, it used a lot of descriptive words, and it is more about the way words sound together rather than figuring out a deeper meaning. And Gothic literature also emerged during this time. And Mary Shelley, she wrote and published Frankenstein or the Modern Prometheus. So what I'm doing right now is I took a darker red and I am adding it to the bottom of the petal to add dimension and depth. And I'm just blending it in here, really trying to make it cohesive and bleed into each other. We don't want any harsh lines. We want it all to look seamless. And Samuel Taylor Coleridge, he also incorporated a lot of Gothic elements in his long-form poems. One of my favorite poems of his, and it might be my favorite poem, The Rime of the Ancient Mariner. So both lyrical poetry and Gothic literature or Gothic elements in poetry really focuses on the expression of the human emotion, and that was huge for the Romantic era. Wordsworth was more fascinated with exploring the relationship between human spirit and nature, and that's what I Wandered Lonely as a Cloud does. So right now I am adding dimension on the petals in the places where it is in the reference photo. So I'm just looking back and forth between the reference photo and taking that deeper golden shade, but without mixing. I don't mix it in with the lighter yellow, and I'm just adding dimension. It's very important just to layer your photos, or not layer your photos, layer your colors. It's very important to layer your colors because that's what adds shape to your painting and really makes it come alive. So now I'm going back in straight with that red color. I'm not really diluting it with water this time. And I really want to deepen up that petal and make it seem like it's drooping down. I'm using gouache like I said, but it's a lot of layering and adding color, manipulating color with the water, thinning it down to make it more translucent. We're going in straight and not watering it at all. I am doing wet on dry technique, so I'm not wetting the paper before I go in with the color. I'm just wetting my brush, taking the color, maybe wetting the color down, and putting it on the paper. It gives you a little bit more control with it. So I am taking a blue color. I put a little bit too much on the petal, but that's okay. You can just dry your brush off and then scoop up what paint that you want to remove from your paper. But this blue, you can see it a little bit in the reference. Mine's a lot darker than the reference color, just because gouache is a little bit more opaque than watercolor. But you'll want to move it around. Right here, I'm just taking off the excess, but I add a little bit more red just to cover up that blue, and it kind of mixed and made it like a muddy purple, which is okay because that'll dry and we'll go back in with a different color, or I'll go back in with a different color. But you just want that blue right there because that is the darkest point of the petal, and it really adds shading and gives it the effect that it's underneath of the middle of the flower. So back to the poem. Wordsworth was inspired by a walk he took with his sister Dorothy around the Glencoe Bay in the Lake District in northwest England, and they came across a large field of daffodils, and that's where the daffodils in the poem came about. In the first stanza, he writes, "I wandered lonely as a cloud that floats on high over vales and hills, when all at once I saw a crowd, a host of golden daffodils, beside the lake, beneath the trees, fluttering and dancing in the breeze." So just in that first stanza, we see the lake that they are walking by, and he paints a picture for us about the daffodils fluttering in the breeze. This is a lyrical poem, and you can see how heavy it is with images. The entire first stanza is just an image of that field of daffodils. So now we're going to move on to the middle of the flower. If you want to think about it, it's shaped more like a bell, if it helps you outline the shape. And I'm not going to come into the petals all the way because you can see in the reference photo that she left a little bit of white space in the petals. Now I did connect it with the third petal, but it's fine. We're going to make the middle a little bit darker or a little bit more vibrant than the outside petals, but right now I'm just adding a light wash in the middle before I go in with my darker colors, and I really am going to try to blend out that outer edge just so there's no harsh edges. I'm not an expert in painting. I am a little bit of an amateur, so it looks like I made the middle a little bit too big, but that's okay. We can fix it. I bet all the art teachers are just screaming at me right now. My technique is just not good, but I'm learning. It's good to learn new things, especially now since we have been stuck in our houses for a while. I've painted a lot more than I have I've painted a lot more in the past month than I have over a year, so that's nice. And I've picked up gouache, which is a new technique. I stick mostly to watercolor, but I wanted to give gouache a try. So I'm going in with a darker yellow to really add dimension and depth to the outer edge of that petal. And then I'm going to take a little bit of that red, mix it in with our golden orange to map out the center of that petal. And I'm trying to make the middle of it, you can see in the reference photo, the middle has two parts or two pieces of the petal that kind of extend farther out, and that just gives it more of a circular appearance. So I'm just going to go back into the red and really and add a little bit more color or a little bit more darkness to that yellow and go in. And the darker the color is, the more depth it's going to give. It's just going to push it back into the paper and allow the highlights to really come through. So later in his poem, in the last stanza, is my favorite stanza of the poem, and it reads, "For oft when on my couch I lie in vacant or pensive mood, they flash upon that inward eye which is the bliss of solitude. And then my heart with pleasure fills and dances with the daffodils." So this brings back nature's relationship with the human spirit and how humans can be affected by nature. And so when he is saying whenever he lies on the couch and is in the mood to think deeper, or is maybe just, tired or bored or whatever, he can close his eyes and he can be filled with happiness whenever he sees the daffodils dancing in the breeze. And I think that is completely applicable to what we're going through what we're going through in the world right now. Most of us are stuck in our homes and trying to keep ourselves busy, but sometimes it's hard and you get bored no matter how many new hobbies that you have. And I sure wish that I was, at the beach, tanning or, playing in the water. And according to William, we can close our eyes and we'll be filled with a peaceful bliss if we think of a part of nature that makes us happy. And I just really love the positive message that this poem gives and how it really just connects everything together. I am a big lyrical poetry fan. I study literature in college, and poetry was never something that I got into in high school, but freshman year of college, a creative writing teacher, she was a poetry graduate student, and she really got me into loving poetry. And it's just the way that words interact with each other that just makes it so beautiful. William feels the same way I do about poetry, and one of his famous quotes is, "Poetry is a spontaneous overflow of powerful feeling." So that, I think, just sums up the entire Romantic era, that one quote, because it is such an era focused on the powerful emotions one feels in relation to themselves or nature or the world around them. And the artists of that time really incorporated that into their different mediums. If you guys aren't familiar with romantic literature or romantic poetry, I highly recommend checking it out. If you struggle with poetry, which is how I struggled with poetry in high school, just because I didn't understand why it never made sense to me. I can be a very logical reader and try to read between the lines, but with poetry, and what my creative writing teacher told us was, it's more about the relationship between the sounds of the word instead of the definitions of the word. It focuses on sound, and I think that's might be a reason why I like romantic poetry. It takes off the pressure of reading between the lines and you focus more on the images. The poems also sound really pretty. If you guys have an extra 30 minutes to 45 minutes of the day, go to YouTube and search Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner, and there is a reading of it, and it's incredible. The images are amazing. It's a little bit more gothic. There is symbolism and there is deeper meaning, but it's by Samuel Taylor Coleridge, and it's amazing. So good. 10 out of 10. Recommend. I always sketch before I paint, but I wanted to just paint straight on the page so it's easier for you guys to follow along. You guys are more than welcome to sketch your outline of the image now that you have it, and then paint it that way. It's always easier. I feel like it's always easier to do that than to go in straight away and try to pinpoint where the petals start and they end in relationship to the other petals, and it's a mess. When I did the practice run, I wanted to paint it first before I ever recorded it, and I think that it turned out a lot better. And why wouldn't it? I wasn't recording, so it had to be better. After I make the flowers or the petals just a little bit bigger, I'm going in and darkening up where I want definition. Some of the shadows on my petals are off, but that's okay. It still looks like a flower. Most of my painting process is just fixing mistakes or touching things up that I don't like, and trying to perfect it, even though it's art and it doesn't need to be perfect. What are some of the books that you guys have been reading during quarantine? I haven't read a whole lot just because I've been finishing up my schoolwork, but I did get to read The Whisper Man, which was super good. Recommend it. It's very good. this year I started Little Women. I never read it when I was younger. I don't know why, because a lot of people read it in their English classes when they're in high school. But I'm still reading that. It's a little bit of a longer read, and I started it when I started school in January, and it's almost May. I need to get on it. But yeah, put some books that you've read in the comments and I will check them out. Another poet that I really enjoy, he's a little bit more contemporary, is Jack Gilbert. The same creative writing teacher that I had freshman year of college recommended it to us. We read some of his poems. I highly recommend it. I know we have I think we have his whole collection at the Pomeroy Library. So if you want to check that out whenever we open our doors again, that would be awesome. One of my favorite poems of his is The Great Fires. His poems are a little bit more practical than like romantic era poems, but they still focus on imagery, and he writes a lot about the passing of his wife. So his are a little bit more sad, but he focuses a lot on places. So I know he traveled and he lived a little bit in Italy and in Europe, but he's from Pittsburgh, and he has a lot of poems about Pittsburgh and his life in Pittsburgh. So Jack Gilbert, the collected poems of Jack Gilbert, or The Great Fires, is also a smaller collection of his, and I think we have both of those at the Pomeroy Library. So if you want to check them out, I highly recommend it. So after we're pleased with the petals, we'll go back in and finish it up just a little bit. But right now, we're going to move on to the stem of the flower. And in the reference photo, you can see some brown on the stem. I'm not really sure what that is. I'm not an expert in botany or on flowers. But the green that I have is too bright, and I don't want it that bright. So I kind of mixed in a little bit of blue just to darken it a little bit, because you can see in the reference photo it is very dark. But I don't have that dark of a green. And we're just gonna follow the shapes. And I didn't connect it in with the petal like it is in her watercolor, just because I didn't want it to bleed. The last time I painted this, I was a little bit more impatient and did not wait for it to dry, and my petals were a green mess, which is something that you have to watch whenever you're using a water medium. Water travels and the paint travels through the water, so if one area of your painting is wet and you don't want paint to go there, but you put down paint, it will go there. So now I am just finding the perfect brown shade for those little stem warmers. I don't know what you'd call them. They look like leg warmers. But I took a brown, but then a little bit more of like a reddish brown. If you don't have reddish brown, you can mix red and brown, and it'll make a reddish brown. Now I am adding a little bit of that green that's peeking through. And then I'm mixing more brown because I ran out. I'm continuing the little stem warmer down. I didn't add the 3 pieces that you see in the reference photo. I just added the 2, which is okay. We're making it our own. My painting definitely does not look like hers, and it is definitely not as pretty as hers, but it's okay. And I'm laying down light washes of the green. I'm going to go back and I'm going to darken it, but I'm just going to lay down that first layer to map out where I want my stem to end. And I'm going to start with another leaf up beside it. As I paint this, I'm looking at the first painting that I did, just so, because it's on a smaller sheet of paper, that's why mine doesn't look anything like the reference photo. But I ran out of room, so I couldn't add more leaves going in that direction. And I want some of these leaves, you can see in the reference photo that the leaves are pretty much all different colors. Well, they're not all different colors, but they're all different shades of green, and they have they're darker as they go up. So I will darken them. I'm going to finish up the painting by just going over the pieces that need darkened, especially those little brown stem warmers. And I'm just going to deepen those up, and that should be, I think that's where I'll end this painting. You can see my painting definitely does not look like the reference. I kind of made it my own. I used a smaller paper than she did, I'm sure. I'm using a different medium. I'm using more gouache, so it's going to look a little bit more deeper in color. Hers actually looks pretty deep in color, but I'm sure she's using really good watercolors. But I hope that you guys really enjoyed following along with the painting, and maybe you learned a little bit about the Romantic era of literature, and hopefully I inspired you guys to paint more and read some William Wordsworth or Samuel Taylor Coleridge or Jack Gilbert. So thank you so much, and I cannot wait for the library to be back open so I can see all your faces and we all can check out books again. So take care, you guys, and I'll hopefully see you very soon.